There it is, episode 26.
26.
I am Steve. Nope, I'm Adam.
You don't want to be Steve.
I'm definitely Adam.
Right, and I'm Steve.
I was thinking, I was like, oh my gosh, we didn't do that in the last one.
We didn't?
No, we didn't.
Wow.
And so I was thinking, I'm Adam. Steve.
Yeah.
I'm Steve. Nope, I'm still Adam, guys.
Right.
Thanks for tuning in today.
Right. 26th episode of this, and then you were just saying earlier today that we're at over 100.
Yeah, just hit our 100th Instagram post the other day. So
if you haven't checked
kinda
out
fun.
Instagram,
Yep.
Because we have some videos.
Yep.
We have some the one slide things which we affectionately call provocative pontifications.
Yep, there it is.
Yeah, some of the stuff we borrow from other people, and some of the stuff's
it's
our
off
own.
the top. Yeah.
Yeah.
Check it out. Follow us if you haven't yet.
Yeah, we'd love it if you follow us, and you'd probably love it even more.
There it is.
Yeah, for sure.
So today, recently we had a real nice uptick in viewers for our podcast, affectionately titled Energy.
Yeah, energy.
Today we're going to hit them with another one. And it sounds, the title will probably actually be a little different than what I'm going to say here, but today it's all about communication.
Yeah.
So what happens, more specifically, what happens when people don't communicate?
Yeah.
Whether it's personal, professional, not a lot good comes from not communicating.
Yeah.
So wanted to touch on that a little bit today.
We do want to touch on that because it's an epidemic. It's been a worldwide epidemic for as long as there's been a world.
Yep. As long as there's been people and
right. Yeah. And there's lots of reasons why people don't communicate, but the consequences are many. And So how do we want to set this up?
I think the first thing, what brought this to mind is sometimes, again, whether it's personal or professional, you get in these situations where maybe it's you and a significant other, or you and a coworker, you and a leader, you and a client, depending on what it is, you and a vendor, it doesn't really matter. If you're a business owner, maybe you and one of your leaders, something like that, where communication starts lacking. Either there's too much comfort and the communication starts lacking. There's an awkwardness, or the trust isn't there. The fear of being vulnerable. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons communications could lack or fail or just not exist, really like go away. And so today it's kind of what happens when that happens, when there's no communication, and how to get it back on track, and how to communicate more effectively, and what are the pros, the good things that come from communicating more specifically on a regular basis. Yeah.
And this is not just an academic thing for us. I think as you set that up, there's a lot of, benign circumstances that can be read of that. I think that, we try to keep it very real and authentic here. And, both personally and professionally in, recent days and weeks and certainly months, there's been circumstances where we find ourselves either collectively or individually, in a circumstance where, I think about the one client north of here. And then the other one way north of here.
Yep.
Where the interaction just goes dead.
Yeah.
And then I just think of, certainly some family situations that I have where, the communication didn't just go dead. It was just, that was the decision that was made to go quiet and to not communicate. And so, let's talk a little bit right off the bat about why that would happen in the first place. Why your experience and observations, what are some of the incidents that stimulate or, cause communication to break down in the first place?
Yeah, there's either some type of like riff or issue between two people. And that's more, maybe I would say more people would think of that as like a personal issue, whether it's you and a significant other, you and a friend, something happens, right? Some interaction or situation happens where there's a riff or a wedge between two people that causes communications to kind of cease.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And by riff, what do you mean?
Something negative, whether it's an argument or a disagreement or anything like that, any type of troubling situation you might find yourself in.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Depending on what, it's whether it's your side, their side, or both parties are to blame.
Right.
And then on the professional side, right, it could be something where, like I said earlier, it could be like a comfortability. You both feel comfortable. We don't need to talk as much. We're in this groove. Or worse yet, it might be, well, I'm not as familiar with you and I'm really not agreeing with you. So I'm going to kind of do my thing over here,
Right.
or I need some space, right? You hear that a lot personally and professionally. I need some space.
Which is a healthy thing.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
For sure.
yeah.
Absolutely. To an extent, of
Right,
course.
right.
Right. So those are kind of some of the situations off the top of my head that I can think of why communication might falter.
Yeah. So when you set it up, a riff is a negative thing. Conflict, many people think, is a negative thing. And, we bump into each other at, some point in life, you and I, and independently, I think we show up to this chance meeting in life believing, correct me if I'm wrong here, if I'm giving you too much credit along this line, but conflict, the way we look at it, you and I look at it, is a good thing.
Yeah.
That when it happens, it is absolutely, positively an opportunity to communicate and clarify, what were you expecting? Because
Exactly.
a riff is something negative, because I was expecting this and I got that.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
And how dare you do that to me? How dare you let me down? And so sometimes the riff or the conflict happens and our immediate communication is negative.
Yeah, exactly.
How could you do that? How could you let me down? When I think the way that we look, and I don't think, the way that we look at it is
Yes.
like, hot damn,
Yeah.
I can't wait to hear
Yep.
what you were thinking.
Yeah, a chance to
Because I'm
improve.
going to better understand
Yep.
where you were coming from, rather than reading a bunch of stuff into it, which is in many cases speculation.
Yeah. Two things that kind of come to mind. One being of a marketing background, I thrive off data and analytics, making
Yep.
data-driven decisions.
Yeah.
The other thing too is when you, when you have conflict, you have these times, and we often talk about healthy conflict.
Yes.
Or in like the last podcast, we talked about energy. Doesn't matter what kind of energy, as long as you point in the right direction.
Right.
When there's conflict going on, it gives you a chance to clarify, like you said, it gives you a chance to gather more data and move forward better. It allows you to have more communication, which is obviously the theme of this podcast, but also to gather more data to see where the either misunderstanding was or why there's a riff or a conflict to begin with, and how you can move forward and go past that. And you're stronger on the other side of that.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to break down what you just said here, because I think it's incredibly meaningful and incredibly powerful. Because when there is conflict and when there's this riff and we feel negative, we feel let down, we feel hurt, the tendency, I believe, in most of us is to focus on where we're at, what we're thinking and what we're feeling. But what you just said is, in that moment, if we can pause our own feelings, if we can just set that off to the side for a second, and as you said, gather more data.
Yeah.
I want to learn more about you.
Exactly.
I want to understand more about where you're at or where you're coming from. Or one of the things that we like to say a lot in working with clients is, what did that mean?
Yeah.
I know how I received it.
Yeah.
But when you did this thing, or you said this thing, or you reacted that way, what did you mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you gather more data. So this whole podcast is about communication, and communication is this two-way deal.
Yes.
And too many times when communication comes up, it's about what we're sending out. When I think when we're talking about communication, make sure that the focus many times is on your receiving.
Yeah, exactly.
Before you send.
And a lot of it, like you said, that is the perception of how you're perceiving, how you're receiving that information might not be the intended
No doubt about
delivery from the other person.
Yep.
And that's huge. And that's the whole point of communication being a two-way street, is you can ask clarifying questions. What I'm hearing you say is X. Is that, is that true?
Right.
Or is that how you are intended? And sometimes, dare I say, maybe a lot of times it's like, no. That's not quite, what I'm trying to say is this, right? Especially if you can, admittedly I came from a background where I wasn't really a great communicator.
What?
And I had to work really hard at it. So
I've never heard that from you. Huh.
So yeah, it's one of those things where you have to work hard at that. And the other thing is being honest with yourself too.
Yeah.
When there's conflict in the workplace or communication falters and you kind of revisit that table, it is a very healthy and great chance to come together to communicate more. One of the benefits from communicating more, and I might be jumping ahead here, but it's being able to understand what the other person's feeling more often. knowing what's going through their head, what's on their plate. It gives you more of a chance to connect more on a regular basis, right? Make sure you're aligned on your goals and expectations, making sure your perceptions are correct. That's the other thing we talk about when it comes to like customer experience, right? We could sit here all day long and say, oh, I know the customer wants that for sure. Yeah. Well, do they really want that? Let's ask them. Yeah. Same thing goes with communication. I might think, you're upset about something, but I'm like, hey, are you upset? And you'd be like, no, not at all. Yeah. So those are some of the things that come to mind, and why communication is so great and why it should be something that you do more often.
So a couple of things I think you just triggered in my mind. One, I thought you were going in the direction of the frequency of communication. Yeah. And so when it comes to communication, personally and professionally, not a lot of times, I think there needs to be an agreement early on and often to say, just as it relates to frequency, how often do we want to talk about us, or how often do we want to talk about where the business is or where the project is, or if it's a supervisor subordinate, here's how often we are going to communicate about your performance, about how the objectives or the goals are coming along. And so that frequency thing needs to be something that's agreed upon. In certain circumstances, like I think about myself and the kids, the older the kids get, the more they have a voice in the frequency of communication. Yeah. When they're younger, they don't have a voice in that, because we're basically, as parents, watching them grow, and we get to dictate and determine how frequent we're going to talk about certain things related to that. In certain supervisory circumstances, if the person's performing at a high level, that frequency of communication may not be as often as somebody that's underperforming or somebody that's performing averagely that needs to perform better. So frequency is one thing. And then the other thing I think is to be more proactive. So earlier in the relationship, talk about communication, how you're going to communicate in times of conflict before you're actually in the conflict. Before you get there. Exactly. That is so huge. My wife and I talk about that a lot too. And to kind of piggyback off that too, the other piece of it, what my wife and I like to call our onion conversations. Peel back all the layers of the onions, right? Get deeper with your communication, get more intentional with it, more of the clarifying questions, make them more like robust. Don't make them like surface level, and that builds more trust and vulnerability between the two people or groups of people having communication. That was a really great point, and that I'm glad you reminded me. Well, and the other thing that we're talking about, how to communicate more successfully, effectively, proactively, the frequency piece. So those are all key dynamics when it comes to communication. But I also want to make the point that communication is an indicator of trust. That when people shut down on you, the trust is an issue. They either, in some cases, don't trust themselves to communicate at that point, where they're either, saying, look, I can't do this right now, consciously or unconsciously, that they just can't do it. Or in some cases, their choice not to communicate indicates their trust or sense of feeling safe with the other person. Yeah. And so we want to be effective at it, but at the same time, we can't push too hard to communicate when the lack of communication is an indication that something's not okay with the relationship. And like you said earlier, sometimes that space is needed, and that's totally healthy and okay. Right. As long as it's agreed upon. I mean, you and I are just on the heels of something professionally where, there was a month, 6 weeks of silence. And sometimes in trying to force communication, like, hey, what's going on? I know something's, a problem. You can irritate the person and push them further away. Which isn't good. And so at the same time, if you assume or speculate that they need space and then you don't, then they might feel abandoned. Yeah. And so that's where, if you proactively set clear expectations about communication, then in that times of silence, they're processing, and they will let me know. And when you be proactive with your communication, and that way, when it gets to tough times or it gets to times of, hard conflict, whether good or not, at least you communicated about before, so it will make that situation easier, better, more understandable, things like that, because you already had that conversation. Right. So there's a better understanding. There's, the situation will just be better overall, which goes back to the beginning. It's better to communicate more often, the frequency, the type, everything we talked about. So and keeping it very authentic and real and candid. If you make those agreements and then you bring it up in the moment of heat, and the person chooses to do something different, that tells you something about them,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
they made an agreement that they didn't. The other thing I want to say related to that is that sometimes we all communicate, say things, react to things in a moment that isn't really how we really feel.
Yeah.
There's emotion. And so I think, being understanding and kind and compassionate and forgiving, that when somebody else does say something and they try to pull that back, like, you know what, I shouldn't have said that. I don't know why I said that. Well, I know why you said that. It's like, come on, give them a break.
Yeah.
We've all been in that position.
Exactly. No. And with that too, sometimes you just can't help it, right? Some things are out of your control, right?
Yeah.
Just like if you have a leader that poorly communicates,
Yeah.
right? If it's a business owner, if it's a leader, if it's a coworker, whatever. There's some people who just aren't good communicators, and that's
Right.
even if you're a good communicator yourself or you try really hard at it, there might just be a situation that's a little bit out of your control, and then I think at that point too, you have to assess whether that's the right situation for you to be in, right?
Yeah.
If you have especially if it's a leader, like if your boss or, a coworker they have to really work with or something, and they're a terrible communicator, a toxic leader,
Yeah.
sometimes you just can't help that. And so if you're watching that, you're in that kind of position, just be aware there might be some things that are out of your control that might not be able to lead to good communication. So,
Yep. And that's probably a great point to wind up the conversation, because communication, there is sending and receiving, and it takes two.
takes two to tango.
There's got to be, and if somebody doesn't want to communicate,
Yeah.
you're kind of out of luck. But
Yeah.
when you find yourself in that circumstance, there have been several things, a little checklist that we've provided today, where you can look. Did we talk about this ahead of time? Are there some things that I can do to maybe break the ice, or ask them where they're at? Do a little self-inventory on yourself. So
Yeah.
hopefully that helps. And
Yeah.
in this key aspect of communication, which there's always misunderstanding, there's always miscommunication, there probably always will be, but how do we reduce the frequency of those challenging aspects of communicating?
Well said. Well said.
Yeah.
All about communication today.
Yeah, you got
Thanks
it.
again for tuning in, guys. Thank you, Steve. And
Thank you.
we'll see you for episode 27 soon.
Next time.
All right.